Medal of Honor, the highest honor a grateful nation can award its military heroes for acts of courage, self-sacrifice, and dedication above and beyond the call of duty. The history of America's survival is written in the blood of its fighting people whose devotion knew no limits. For the past 50 years, fighting men who wore the silver wings came from all over America when their country called. They learned to fly, they learned to fight, and they never flinched from facing combat. Some lived through 2 world wars. Many paid the full price. This is their story.
During World War II, the 8th Air Force, based in England, was often the workhorse of the Allied Air Command. Flying B-17s at first, and later B-24s, the men of the 8th frequently carried their bombs deep into enemy territory to destroy German aircraft and armament production centers. On July 1st, 1943, elements of the 8th Air Force landed in Benghazi, Libya, near the North African coast. Joining elements of the 9th Air Force, they prepared for a daring and vitally important mission. A mission that would cost many lives, yet stand as one of the finest examples of courage and self-sacrifice in the entire war. Every man who flew on this mission was decorated for his heroism, and no less than 5 men were awarded the Medal of Honor. Of these, only Colonel John Keane and Colonel Leon Johnson lived to receive their nation's highest tribute. This is not only their story, but the story of each man who took part in burning Ploesti oil. The planning to deprive the Nazis of the rich Romanian oil fields at Ploesti began months in advance. Once assembled, the Special Strike Force on the Libyan desert began 30 days of intensive training for what they hoped would be a devastating surprise attack. The plan was to approach the heavily defended target area at extremely low altitude to avoid detection for as long as possible. In a rehearsal of the raid, with full bomb loads, the strike force passed over a simulated target area in the desert in approximately 2 minutes. As 0 hour approached, every man knew it would be a tough mission, 2,400 miles round trip. Ground crews labored throughout the night. The planes would have to carry extra fuel and extra ammo to fight off enemy aircraft, since there could be no Allied fighter protection. In addition, each aircraft carried 2 boxes of incendiaries to be dropped by hand in the target area. Dawn, August 1st, the great adventure began. Colonel Keane and Colonel Johnson each led one of the 5 main bomber groups into the air and out over the Mediterranean. Everything was proceeding on schedule as planned, and then the unforeseen happened while crossing the mountains of Yugoslavia. In dense clouds, the 5 bomber groups became separated. Those flying at higher levels picked up a tailwind and moved well ahead of the others. Once over Romania, the strike force dropped so low they could not be detected by radar. They met no enemy fighter resistance as they closed in, but because of the separation over the mountains, only the lead group had the vital element of surprise in their favor when they reached Ploesti. The trailing groups, with Colonel Keane's and Colonel Johnson's elements, arrived several minutes later over the target area whose defenses had been thoroughly alerted. Flames higher than their aircraft added to the enemy's point-blank attack. But rather than turn back from such a vital mission, Keane and Johnson elected to lead their planes through the blazing inferno and across the specified target at minimum altitude. Some planes were hit miles before their target, but kept flying forward into the flames even though their punctured fuel tanks were streaming gasoline. Keane's men fired 2,400 rounds of ammunition in 90 seconds over the target, often firing upward at anti-aircraft units on tops of buildings. Despite the hazard of oil fires, exploding delayed action bombs, and enemy fighters, Colonel Johnson also delivered his bombs on target. 9 planes of his group were lost in the hail of enemy bullets. At one time, 3 separate bomb groups were over the target simultaneously, flying in different directions at low altitude. Enemy observers said it was the greatest exhibition of flying skill they had ever seen. They thought it was planned that way. 41 planes were lost in the mission, but the vital Ploesti oil field had been severely crippled. With not enough fuel to return to Benghazi, Colonel Kane was forced to lead his group to a landing on the island of Cyprus in the Mediterranean. Shortly after, Colonel Kane received the Medal of Honor at Cairo. The citation reads, in part,
"Through conspicuous gallantry in this most hazardous action, and by his intrepidity at the risk of his own life above and beyond the call of duty, Colonel Kane personally contributed vitally to the success of this daring mission."
Colonel Johnson received his Medal of Honor in England. The closing passage of his citation reads, in part,
"Colonel Johnson's conspicuous gallantry in action and intrepidity at the risk of his life, above and beyond the call of duty, constitute such deeds of valor and distinguished service as have, during our nation's history, formed the finest traditions of our armed forces."